So, when we were kids, we used to attend our school and sometimes not attend our school. And I think all of you might have experienced the same thing. You go to school and you don't agree to what teacher says, you don't follow the rules of the school, you bunk the classes and you are completely out of control. This is all natural for kids and teens when they are like crazy and cranky and they're mad, basically. But they think that, well, it's time to enjoy and let's have fun. We all have experienced that. Similarly, there are people like this, like these kids and teens in this world, who don't follow the system of God, who don't follow scriptures. Just like those kids, just like we were there, we didn't follow our teachers, the laws of school. Similarly, there are people in this world, and probably let me put it straightforward, there are like majority of people whom we call them as atheists, who don't like to follow God and His scriptures and His laws. Religion has a word for this, for these kind of people, and the word is they are sinners. Now this word is very, very common in the West, sinners, and there's a lot of taboo around this word, sinners. People don't like this word, but of course today's topic is related to this word. We are going to discuss what is sin. Now, when we talk about sin, there is a first we must define what is a sin. We can define sin at two levels. The first level to define sin is when a person defies the system of God, the laws of God. That is a sin. At least according to religious texts, they define it like that. I mean to say that's a universal definition. If you don't follow God, if you don't follow His system, that's supposed to be a sin. That's the first level of definition of sin. And because of doing this, because of not following God and His system and His laws, you get separated from Him. You get separated from His grace as it is poured in Christianity. You become devoid of His mercy, as it is said in Bhagavad Gita. So that's the second level of sin. The result of the sin is that you get separated from God. You get separated. You are not eligible for attaining His mercy, and as a result, we are in clutches of birth, death, disease, and old age. So these are two levels of sin. The first is defiance of the system. The second is separation from God who has made this system. This is a sin, which is technically, in Sanskrit, is called as paap. So today's topic is, by the way, what is sin? That's what we are going to discuss today. What is paap? If we want to understand what is sin, of course, basic definition is very clear, but we must go in details to understand, okay, if you don't follow the laws of God, that's a sin, but then what are the laws of God? Which laws, if we don't follow, then it's a very grievous sin. Some laws, if you don't follow, it's not so grievous. And that is why sins come in two categories, divided into two categories. And the text says, 𝗙𝗲𝗄𝗃 𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗀. The rest of the verse I'll tell in a few minutes. But what we need here is a part of this verse, 𝗙𝗲𝗄𝗃 𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗀. Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, 𝗪𝗲𝗪𝗪𝗪. Durachar means sin or paap, and 𝗪𝗲𝗪𝗪 means grievous sins. 𝗪𝗲𝗪𝗪, grievous sins. So Krishna is trying to, Bhagavad Gita is trying to divide sins into two categories. One is grievous sins, 𝗪𝗲𝗪𝗪𝗪. Another is not so grievous sins, durachar. Sudurachar, when you add su, it becomes grievous. When you simply say without su, durachar, then it is like, it's not so grievous. It's not so dangerous sins. One is dangerous sins. In Christianity, this is called as, anybody who knows, you have read Christian theology, this is called as mortal sin and venial sin. So sudurachar, examples of sudurachar, grievous sins, are all kind of offenses which we do. Now by offense are those sins which you commit against God and His devotees. And that is definitely a grievous sin. You can beat a person on the road, and that of course is a crime in the eyes of laws. But if you beat a devotee, then in the eyes of God it's a grievous sin, sudurachar. So there are 10 aparadh which come in category of sudurachar. All the 10 offenses against holy name, they are sudurachar, they are grievous sins. And what's the result of grievous sins, I'll just tell in a moment, but this is one example of grievous sins. Now, the 10 offenses against holy name, if you don't remember them, in summary, those 10 offenses are like blaspheming devotees, blaspheming God, or equating God, the supremeness of God with other gods, like polytheism is a sin, and also blaspheming scriptures is a sin, or blaspheming holy name is a sin, and also willfully enjoying this word, understanding the fact that this word is not a place for enjoyment, willfully indulging in carnal pleasures, that's a sin. That's a grievous sin in the eyes of God, is sudurachar. This is the first example of sudurachar. Next example of sudurachar are 4 regulative principles in Krishna consciousness: meat eating, illicit sex, intoxication, gambling. And that's why we are supposed to not do them at any cost. Now what's the result of sudurachar? If you commit grievous sins, immediately we get disconnected from the mercy of God. Immediate disconnection from the grace of God. You fall out of the grace of God. That's how dangerous sudurachar is, especially for devotees. Our whole life, our whole aim and object of life is to please God and connect with Him, and through His mercy. And here, if you do this sudurachar, you disconnect yourself from mercy, there's no chance to get connected with Him and please Him. So the whole project fails. It's a disaster in the life of a devotee. And that's why Krishna says sudurachar. He brings this point. But the point which he's trying to bring in this verse is a little different, but here I'm talking about categories. So I'll come to that point a bit later. But the point to remember now is the examples of sudurachar. There are 2 examples: 10 offenses against holy name, and also the 4 regulative principles which we follow in Krishna consciousness. So in any condition, we are not supposed to commit these offenses and break regulative principles. Prabhupada says you will immediately fall down. So this is sudurachar. The next is durachar, not so grievous sins. So durachar, that's not serious. For example, Nectar of Instruction, Rupa Goswami, I think he says in 3rd verse, 𝗙𝗲𝗪 प्रयासस्य प्रजल्पो नियमाग्रश्च जनासंगश्च 𝗙𝗹𝗪𝗀 भक्तिर्विनश्यति. He says there are 6 things you should not do. It will hamper your devotion. It will not disconnect you from God. It will not make you fall down, but it might impede your devotion. So there are 6 things which come in durachar, not so grievous sins. That is over-endeavoring, overeating, overindulging in eating or maybe enjoying, prajal, gossiping, 𝗙𝗪 प्रयासस्य प्रजल्प नियमाग्रश्च, following rules and regulations without understanding them, janasangascha, associating with those people who are non-devotees or half-devotees, and 𝗙𝗹𝗪𝗀, having greed for attaining something in this material world. devotees who are practicing devotees, they have these things in their heart. I mean, it's not easy to get out of these 6 things, but in the eyes of God, it's not so grievous sin, because this is natural, and this is I mean to say, this is not natural, this is unnatural, but at the same time, any new devotee, it's not expected that he'll be free of all these 6 things. It takes time for them to go. But if you're old or you're new, sudurachar, grievous sins, you should never do. Otherwise, you are out of devotion. So these are 2 categories, sudurachar and durachar. Now, the important point. You have to hear carefully. So, what is so I've explained what is sudurachar, what is durachar, and the effects of them. Sudurachar will disconnect you from God. Durachar will not disconnect you, but will make Krishna or God little displeased, and it will impede your devotion. But here a point has to be remembered, and this very point Krishna is making in this verse of Bhagavad Gita, 9th chapter, 30th verse. He is saying, Krishna is saying, api chet suduracharo. He is saying, so in Sanskrit, api means even if. Api chet suduracharo, even if my devotee commits sudurachar. That means he is not committing grievous sins willfully. He is committing grievous sins without his full will involved in that, maybe out of his habit, or without the knowledge that this is a grievous sin. If the devotee is very new, he doesn't understand what to do, what not to do. Or maybe out of previous habits, out of reflex and impulse, he is doing this kind of grievous sins. Then Krishna says, Bhastima manonebhak sadhureva samantavya. Then Krishna says, I consider him as a saint, and I will not disconnect him from myself. I will still continue to grace him with my mercy and with my blessings. Now that's a beautiful, consolation from God, from the side of God, Bhagavad Gita. That's a hope there, isn't it? Krishna says, okay, grievous sins will disconnect you, but if you do grievous sins as an impulse or a habit, or without your full will involved, still I'll help you. There will be mercy there. You don't get disconnected from me. Please continue. And try to get rid of this sudurachar. So this is some kind of caveat there, a loophole there. Not a loophole, but a caveat there, which you have to understand what Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita. And the same goes for durachar. Durachar, not so grievous sins, if we are doing out of habit or impulse or reflex, then devotion is not so much impeded. But if we are doing this kind of durachar with knowledge that this is wrong, and still we are committing it, then your devotion will get impeded more, as in compared to when you are doing durachar without your knowledge or without full will involved in that. So this thing we have to remember, a footnote, a side note there. You have to always consider, when you're considering sin, you have to consider these 2 points as footnotes, whether that person's will is involved and whether he has the knowledge that it is a sin. And according to that, God decides whether to give mercy or whether to take back his mercy. So this is all about sin. We have to remember this, and if we can understand these dynamics of sin, then we can save ourselves from committing sin. In fact, a devotee tries his level best not to commit sudurachar and durachar. I mean to say, sudurachar we don't want to commit, and durachar, of course, we get involved sometimes, but we have to practice and raise our soul, raise ourselves from this sin, and then connect with God and attain him and attain his grace.